Hi everyone, Mr. Melhorn back with you here. Wanted to talk about York County's experience in the Revolutionary War and continue our journey. Now, you had looked at 1775, which was the year before we declared independence, and I'll say kind of quickly that it's pretty impressive that we actually decided to volunteer and fight before our entire country declared independence from Britain. But anyway, moving back here, you looked at 1775, 1776, and it was not the best of times for our county. It wasn't the best of times for our new country, and we had just suffered a loss at New York. And now we are just clinging on to hope in holding Pennsylvania, specifically holding our capital city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, eventually, York's going to play a significant role here, but we're just trying to hold every major city we possibly could against the British as they're trying to make an advance on us. But things were quite bleak already. We had just lost New York City, and our York County men were actually, some of them were captured. Specifically, our captain, Henry Miller, was captured and he died on a prison vessel that was out there in New York, out in the harbor of New York. And most of the soldiers that were there weren't fed very well, and sickness passed like crazy, specifically smallpox passed like crazy. And we're led to believe that he actually died either from malnutrition or smallpox. And so we lost our captain in the mix there. And so it kept on passing down the rank until somebody else was going to take charge. So we still had York County men, and we recruited more and recruited more and more, and they kept fighting. And they kept on serving and sacrificing just for the good of our country. Now, the next big battle that we engaged in was in 1777 in September, another big September 11th day, as you can see on this map here. But the Battle of Brandywine, which is just outside of Philadelphia, it was a battle to try to defend Philadelphia and keep our capital city, but it did not work. The British were able to flank around Washington's forces, his Patriot forces. Washington had not protected all of the crossings of the Brandywine Creek, and the British were able to swoop around, attack his right flank, get him in a vulnerable position, and the Patriot forces had to retreat. From that point, Washington retreated back to Philadelphia, but realized he is heavily outnumbered and did not have any good defensive location to fight from, and so he elected to give up Philadelphia. So we had to leave our capital city. So not only had the British taken New York and Boston, now they also took our capital, Philadelphia, and everything was especially bleak from this point forward. Now, our soldiers, when they left Philadelphia, including our York County men, went to Valley Forge, just outside of Philly as well, in a place where they could have some good defenses. But the weather was absolutely terrible. We lost thousands of soldiers at Valley Forge from starvation, from smallpox, from sickness, from, well, freezing to death. But altogether, it was a terrible experience. But our York County men, for those that survived, they came out battle hardened and ready to roll, actually, kind of like had their spirits somehow increased because they survived such a terrible time. Now, I do have a video in here. I'm not going to show it by way of screencast, but I want you to go back and look at it so you can truly see the experiences they had at Valley Forge and why they came out better out of this than when they went into it. And as far as the government went, our government officials went to Lancaster first. They had to leave the capital city, Philadelphia, which they love Philadelphia, but they didn't want to be captured by the British because they realized that people like John Adams and people like Thomas Jefferson, they were public enemy number one. And if they were caught by the British, they were going to be, well, they were going to be hanged. And so they realized this is dire circumstances. So they left and they went towards Lancaster. But they realized once they got there that Lancaster was already taken by the state House of Representatives. There was no place to stay. There was no courthouse to meet in. So our national Congress was going to have to go someplace else because somebody got there first. And at the same time, they respected the state government, so they didn't want to boot them from that city of Lancaster. So they ended up in York. Our national Congress, people like John Adams, Samuel Adams, John Hancock, actually came to this little pioneer town of York, Pennsylvania. Now, I will say, they did not like the place. And the York Counties kind of jacked up prices and did not treat them very fairly. And so a lot of our founding fathers kind of hated York. But the other piece, too, is the fact that York was primarily a German town. And when people like John Adams came here, they thought it was almost like a foreign country because every single church service was in German. Every single person seemed to speak German and no English. And so It was to them just a foreign land, and they were ready to get out of it as fast as possible. But not so fast. They did do something very significant while they were here, and they should thank York for the protection it gave them. Now, one of the things I should mention on that accord is this: they had great protection from a natural geographic boundary that York has that we still take for granted today. That's the Susquehanna River. To get across the river, you're going to have to go by boat. You're going to have to get a ferry boat to take you across. And what the Continental Congress is going to have is they're going to have lookouts on the river, watching the river at all times, just in case the British try to come attack. And so it gave them a level of protection where they'd get knowledge of the British advancing on them. So even though these guys were kind of public enemy number one, they could get out and leave York if the British were on their heels. So they they should thank York for the protection it provided them. Now, they met at a courthouse that looked like this. Now, this one is located just outside of the square of York, and this is a replica courthouse. You can actually see on the picture. Get rid of this guy here. Oh, I still can't see it. So, this one was rebuilt in 1976, but originally the first courthouse we had in York was in 1754, built in 1754, and was located directly in the square of York. So John Adams, John Hancock, our Continental Congress members met here in this courthouse, and this was the place that they called home for 9 months from 1777 to 1778. And there, these guys, and this guy's name is John Adams, not John Adams Hancock. This is John Adams, Samuel Adams, the cousin of John Adams, and John Hancock, the guy who signed a big signature on the Declaration of Independence. They came to this courthouse, and they worked on this document, our first government. Now, in every single government class you've ever taken, in any kind of early American history study you've ever done, everybody trashes the Articles of Confederation. It doesn't deserve that. And I want you to know this: when these guys showed up in York, all they cared to do was unite our country in some way. They wanted to find a way to raise taxes so they could actually buy uniforms and guns and cannon for our soldiers. And they wanted to find a way to help France see us as a united nation and maybe just sign a treaty with us. So all they cared is to craft some kind of government real fast that was going to unite us. And that's exactly what the Articles of Confederation did. They were imperfect. Who cares? They didn't need to be perfect. All they needed to do is in this moment quickly unite us as a country, allow us to raise money so we can buy guns and fight the British, and also maybe get the French on our side. Let's say that thing once again: unite our country, bring us together, make us one. That's all it meant. That's all that mattered. Yeah, it's not perfect. Yeah, we don't know about the Articles anymore. If you ask somebody on the street, they'd have no idea what the Articles of Confederation were, but it doesn't matter. They created them. These were actually drafted here in York in 1777 and 1778. And that's why York likes to say we're the first capital, is that we had Congress here when the United States was being born. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. York's not the first capital. I'd say Philadelphia is, because that's where we became the United States of America. But for 9 months, the Congress met here. So we were a capital of the nation, maybe just not the first capital. And they created a document that seriously helped us in our fight for independence. Now, a couple of little things that happen here that I want to mention is that a French leader, a French rich guy, dignitary by the name of Marquis de Lafayette, he had a meal with some other governmental leaders at the property you see on the right here. And you may have seen this statue downtown in York, and this is the Marquis de Lafayette statue. And he's raising a wine glass. He was up in this room up here in downtown York, and there are some people that didn't like George Washington, primarily because George Washington was losing a lot of battles. I've already mentioned to you that our York County soldiers had some pretty bleak times in the early battles of the war, losing Boston, losing New York, losing Philadelphia. And so some of the people did not like Washington and was ready to give him the boot. Marquis de Lafayette loved Washington, was a great friend of Washington. And in this room, he saved Washington's job. And because of this moment that happened in downtown York back in 1778, we still think of George Washington as a fantastic leader of our country and our first president. If not for this toast to Washington, we may not have Washington as one of our heroes in our country. So here's what happened. Everybody was going around giving toasts. People were toasting this leader, this person, that person. And Marquis de Lafayette stands up and he realizes these guys don't like Washington. And they want him out. They're the ones that are behind a conspiracy plot to get rid of George Washington. So he stands up and he says, I'd be remiss, gentlemen, if I did not raise a toast to our general, George Washington. He always finds success, and he probably tossed some other things in there too. But he wanted to make sure that everybody in that room realized where the French were and what they did, what they believed in George Washington. And from that moment, no one was going to unseat George Washington as our commander, as our leader. He's our guy, and that conspiracy plot is gone. So Marquis de Lafayette spoiled that thing real quick just by one toast to George Washington. And it happened right here in York, Pennsylvania in 1778. And we have this statue to commemorate that. Now, last thing here, we actually have a York County man who was a signer to the Declaration of Independence. And he was here. He actually gave up his house. He gave up his law office. He gave up everything pretty much he had to try to get the Congress acclimated to York so they had beds to sleep in, places to stay, places to meet. And so James Smith is our York Countian who opened up his house and opened up everything he had to try to support the war and support our Congress while they were here. He also was our big-time government member from this area and just a homebred York County guy. Now, he also owned this business as well. It's called Cadorus Furnace. And in this furnace, they would make cannon parts, bullets, rifle parts, other materials that would then actually support the war. And so a lot of the stuff that our men fought with, a lot of the war materials, were actually molded within this furnace that's actually in the eastern side of York. And so he also owned that, but he produced tons of war material to try to support our soldiers. But that's James Smith. So a really good guy who was a fantastic leader for our area, a fantastic leader for our country. Now, the absolute last thing here. Towards the end of the war, our country also needed a place to keep prisoners that we had taken, especially from the Battle of Saratoga in 1777 up in New York. So we had thousands of prisoners that had to be housed somewhere. It was decided that we create a makeshift prison in Eastern York. And so they created this prison camp. We don't have any good pictures of it. This is all we really have is this nice little artistic rendering. And this is called Camp Security. And so we actually had our own little prisoner of war camp in York. Now, altogether, we kept fighting and we gained back Philadelphia. The British actually vacated Philadelphia. We gained it back. And so our founding fathers, go back to these gentlemen here, left here. They went back to Philadelphia. They were extremely happy to go back to Philadelphia because they could now go to shows, concerts. They now could go to nice restaurants. They no longer had to be around the German people so much. And so they had their creature comforts again. Now, I'll say this, York served its purpose. York was exactly what they need when they needed it, and they should be thankful for what York gave to them. All right, thank you much.